Good evening. I know I'm the last speaker, but I think I can get a better good evening than that. Good evening. So I thank the Pope for his vision in convening this summit, Monsignor Serrando, Susanna, our amazing leader, Jennifer Gross, our sponsor, and all who made the summit possible. My deepest thanks to being part of this gathering of extraordinary judges and prosecutors. For me, a judge 15 years on the U.S. District Trial Court and 18 years on the Court of Appeals on the federal bench, and now with an early retirement in another dream job where I work full-time rule of law in Africa. It's a special privilege to be here. The second reason I'm so thrilled to be here is because I am not African by birth, but I am African by choice and by the heart. I have spent the last 18 years doing training and exchanges in Africa, East and West Africa, and I want to start with an amen to my sister, Ms. Ituri, who talked about developing nations and the needs to stand up, and African nations and the needs to stand up to deal with the root of poverty. And I was thinking the women in this room, if the women in this room ruled the world, how different the world would be. We do not rule the world, but there's a lot we can do as judges and prosecutors, and that we must do, that we must stand up for justice, to give voice to the voiceless, to stand up for those who are victims of human trafficking. And it is my job to give you an overview of modern slavery in the United States. And we have started, in terms of our human trafficking laws, we passed them in the year 2000. We created an interagency task force made up of 15 cabinet-level positions, and those agencies meet on a regular basis, and that's been very helpful, that they have to report to the White House on what their agencies are doing in the area of human trafficking. Also, we have protections for visas as it relates to trafficking victims. The crimes that we charge are the very same crimes you charge. One of the differences is we have severe penalties up to 20 years, and with aggravation up to life imprisonment. There's civil and criminal forfeiture laws, which I mentioned earlier, and I won't go into that. We're also on a couple international conventions, the TIP protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, the migrant protocol against the smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air, and the International Labor Organization of Forced Labor Convention. And we also produced this TIPS report, which I know you're familiar with. And this year in the TIPS report, one of the 4 principles that was emphasized, and Monsignor, you'll be interested in this, was it said that government should take steps to prevent and address human trafficking in government procurement. Government should encourage the private sector to prevent and address human trafficking in supply chains, should advance responsible recruitment and policies and practices, and should strive for harmonization. And in the TIP report, as you all know, data is collected on other countries. That data on human trafficking, countries are divided into 3 tiers. The criteria is trafficking prohibited? What's being done seriously to eliminate trafficking? And it makes recommendations. And the fastest growing crime is human trafficking in the world. 25 million people, majority women, 50% sex exploitation, and human trafficking is on the rise in the United States. In the TIP report, there were some key recommendations. One was to set out a national anti-trafficking hotline, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But to publicize, as many of you have suggested, among officials, professionals, community groups, and the public, this problem, creating task force for the training of the judiciary, the bar, and law enforcement, and NGOs. And let me speak about this training, because in the training I've done in Liberia, Kenya, and Tanzania, We have done joint trainings with high court, magistrate, law enforcement, prosecutors, and defense counsel to address issues like human trafficking, wildlife trafficking, and some of you might say, well, that doesn't work. Well, the judges should learn here, and the prosecutors should learn here, and the law enforcement should learn here. But the point is, you get one message out with all the stakeholders, and then you subdivide when you want to talk about specific things that relate to that specific entity. The other thing is, in terms of this training, and I know a lot of you are getting training from the World Bank and other entities, and I work a lot with Lawyers Without Borders, I think it's really important when trainers come in that you ask that there be a couple days of training of trainers. That is, that the judges and the prosecutors and the magistrates also learn to be trainers, because international trainers should be out of work one day. This is the training that you should do yourselves. And the third point I want to make, in terms of the State Department grants and some of these grants, I've had a lot of delegations visit me in the U.S., and they will have judges go and visit the Library of Congress and a lot of other irrelevant agencies to me, to judges. And so when you get when you get that money to come and visit the U.S., you can dictate what you want to see on these tours and the things that are most meaningful to you. Making information available on reporting crimes, victim care, educating law enforcement, we've all talked about that. So this issue of data, because this was raised, I think, by my sister from Malawi. I think you raised this issue of data and data collection. Who are the people who are the most vulnerable, and how do you identify them? And I know that because of resources, you're unable to do a thorough study in your countries, but there's something that has been done in the U.S. by an NGO called Polaris. It was formed in 2002. And what it does is it runs a national human trafficking hotline 24 hours, 7 days a week. They get calls, they get text messages from all 50 states. It's partially funded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It's the largest data compilation that we have. That data matters because it helps us identify where human trafficking is, what kind of human trafficking is going on, and then it helps us make a decision about resources. Polaris also provides victims with shelter, medical treatment, social services, online chats. It protects their identities. They have interpreters with over 200 languages that can get complaints, and it gathers advocates and works with local communities. I had this slide on funding because you might wonder, well, how is it that you get to fund this? And I want you to pay attention. That first line is foundation. You see 54%, individuals 18%, corporations 11%. So now we have in America people that are generous and get outraged about human trafficking, just like you have in your countries. But people in America don't just give because their heart pulls them to it or because they're outraged. There are tax benefits in the United States for giving. So one of the things I want to suggest when you're dealing with your politicians and your political will, and I know it's very difficult, and I know it's a hard road, but you know, ladies, we're in baby step land. We can only do one step at a time. And when you begin with an idea, ideas begin to grow. You get one person, you get another one, you get somebody in Parliament who buys this, you get people in business who buy that. So for this Polaris, 83% of that money, donated money. So think about that. Polaris also does a snapshot of what's going on in the country, so that bottom figure, 10,000, that's the individual victims, at 8,700 human trafficking cases, 4,800 potential traffickers, 1,600 businesses. And then that map, which is blown up, where it's red, those are the places where most of the human trafficking is found in the United States. And so in terms of human trafficking, sex trafficking is the highest, 7,200, 1,900 labor trafficking, and then sex and other trafficking. And 3 types of trafficking, everybody's covered this: sex trafficking, sex and labor trafficking, so I'm not going to spend time on that. But the thing that was key that Polaris did this year was they did a topology of modern slavery, defining slave and trafficking in the United States. What they did, they took that hotline of data. They looked over 9 years, 32,000 cases. They analyzed the data. They got input from survivors and experts and practitioners, and they developed a classification system. And these are the 25 categories of human trafficking. I passed out a document. I'm not going to go over it. We've discussed many, many of these topics, and they're all the same. So sex trafficking goes from escort services to labor trafficking to farm workers, and each exploitation differs. Each has different strategies, different recruiting, different ways to control victims and concealing the crimes. We know there's an overlap. They use legitimate businesses, they use social media, transportation systems, and they use visas. So this is just an example of what they did. So on escort services, there are 461 cases. The trafficker profile, either a single trafficker or organized crime. Recruitment, fraudulent job offers, methods of control, physical and sexual violence. Business model, operations through hotel rooms, geographic patterns in the cities. They move from city to city in response to the demand on sex, and primarily 94% women. So in household work, 1,190 cases, usually wealthy people. This is where we get most of our restitution, because these are wealthy individuals hiring people, and we can get their assets. They give temporary work visas, just like we saw in that example from Tunisia. They isolate people, they pull the visas away, they pull the passports away. Most are foreign nationals and many from sub-Saharan Africa, and most of them, 87%, are adult. The agriculture category, pretty much the same thing. I just wanted you to get an idea of what it's like, and 91% of those foreign nationals. So what are some of the crucial next steps that we need to look at? Well, the establishment of a national hotline, I think, is a great thing, because everything gets centered into one place. So you get a not-for-profit or an NGO, and you get that hotline, and it's going 24/7, and people can text in. You want to amend and toughen the trafficking laws. This is not the, I had added some more things to this slide. This isn't the version I had originally put in there, but I'm going to tell you on number 3, I have educate and collaborate. The judiciary, prosecutors, defense bar, police, NGOs, churches, the public, social media, editorial boards. It's no law that says judges can't meet with editorial boards and talk about the problem. When you meet with an editorial board, you get some of those members interested. They will write good articles, because there's nobody that loves human trafficking. Everybody hates human trafficking. TV, PSAs like that public service announcement we saw in Tunisia. Radio, because in Africa, a lot of places, radio is an easy way to get to people. Working with the chiefs. Look at that female gender mutilation issue in Senegal, where that organization, I can't think of it, where she went with the chiefs to the different villages and talked about FGM. And virtually FGM is wiped out in Senegal, as I understand it. The business community. I think a lot of times we don't think about business community. Look at the friends we have as judges. We have friends in every strata of society, educated friends that we can get engaged in these issues, and they can become the leaders that build coalitions with businesses against human trafficking. Prosecutorial driven prosecutions. I don't think that's in there. So we heard about how police prosecutors are the ones in some countries that are prosecuting. And even when it's evolved where real prosecutors who are lawyers are prosecuting, it's still the same old method. where the police officer brings the case to the prosecutor. There are a lot of things that need to be done. Sometimes it's too late because the perpetrator knows the police is after them. We need to have prosecution-driven investigations where the police come to the prosecutors, particularly in an area like human trafficking. Using guilty pleas, something that's not popular, but something that I think can help in this area. Expansion of the pro bono culture. Use of law schools and law clinics, letting law students get involved in these areas. The forfeiture we've talked about, creation of manuals and handbooks. Some of you have already created handbooks. Those handbooks need to be shared. They need to be shared because why reinvent the wheel? Strengthen legal aid and services for children. Develop a comparative analysis of various countries in various categories. I think it was Malawi who had a really nice chart where she set out, here's the laws we have, here's what the statistics are, here's what the challenges are, here's what we've done. That's an easy thing for every country to fill out so we can make a comparison and we can see what are the things that have been learned. This challenges, finally, this creation of a national committee to address trafficking. I started out with it. I said we had that at our government level. But we need national committees on a national level that address this with various stakeholders. I'm talking not just people in law. I'm talking business people, social workers, educators, people from government, because that's what we need to address it. And finally, a national campaign. You saw how powerful those public service ads are. This is something that has to be a campaign. We have to change a culture. We have to change people. We have to change people's views on things. And so we need a national campaign. In the US, you have to amend laws to capture trafficking, and so we were finding so much was going on the internet, and so this year, the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act was passed. The Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act was passed to address that. Educating and collaborate, we talked about the various stakeholders. Is that it? And then this is just an example of the organizations that get together to deal with human trafficking on a local and grassroots level. Just expansion of pro bono, if I can just talk about that. This is Jones Day. This was a woman who was a Malawian diplomat in DC. She worked 15 hours a day, paid nothing, confined to the house, slept on the floor. Our law firm got her an award for $1 million. Another one involved a woman working in the U.S. Embassy in Yemen. She was a housekeeper, basically held as a slave, awarded $3 million. That was a big law firm, but little law firms in America do pro bono work. So we've got to try to grow a pro bono culture in these countries so these lawyers take things on. This is just the law students. There are 5 law schools that do this. I just want to finally say that women can change the world. Most of us are first-generation lawyers and first-generation judges. We have all overcome great struggles and great obstacles, but we have all dreamed big. We have worked hard. We never gave up. We stood up and we gave back. And if we all continue to dream big and work hard and stand up and to give back, we can change human trafficking and we can represent those who are the voiceless. Thank you.